Hello and welcome to week 2 of the Nevermoor Series Readalong. I'm Jess Townsend, the author of the Nevermoor books, and this week we have been reading chapters 9 to 16 of Nevermoor. I hope you've been enjoying it. I've been having so much fun. Thank you so much for all of your questions and comments and your messages and the photos that you've been sharing. I hope you enjoyed the recaps of the last one. I'm going to try and keep the yapping to maybe not a minimum, but at least like slightly less than last week. Wish me luck. I've never been able to do that in my life. But hopefully I won't have to split this video into 2. Now, you may also notice that I'm not where I was last week, and I'm also not where I will be moving forward. Normally I would be filming these videos in my office at home. I am not in my office at home. I'm in a hotel room. Apologies for the slightly uninspiring background, but I am sitting on the floor where the lighting is best for filming. I'm in Japan. I've been in Japan for the last few weeks with my friends and my sister. And if you're in Australia, and particularly if you're on the East Coast, you may already be aware that we have a friend coming to town. His name is Cyclone Alfred. And I think back home, as I record this, they're waiting for Cyclone Alf to land, and our flight home was cancelled, so we're here for a few more days, hence me filming right here. If you are in the path of Cyclone Alfred, I hope that you and your family are safe and well. I hope you are tucked up cozily at home with lots of snacks and a fully charged mobile phone battery. Now, let's get started with Chapter 9, Wondrous Welcome. Let's begin with Chapter 9, Wondrous Welcome. Now, this introduces quite a lot in the space of one chapter. A couple of really important concepts, magical concepts for the city of Nevermoor, a very important place and a location, and then quite a lot of what will become important characters. The first concept that we're introduced to is the brolly rail. Now, in the last few chapters, Morrigan received a very special birthday present from Jupiter, which was her black oilskin umbrella. And I said, that's going to be important. And here is where it becomes important. So the brolly rail is a transportation system that I created because I was thinking of what is the most absurd way for people to travel through Nevermoor. And I wanted something that kind of reflected the general spirit and vibe of Nevermoor, in that it feels a bit magical and very silly and ridiculous, but also has this quite scary, terrifying edge to it, and is genuinely quite hazardous. Jupiter says, I've only broken my legs on this thing twice. So we do get the idea that, this could go terribly wrong. The brolly rail, if you can imagine, so when you go on the underground or the metro or subway or a tram and you're standing in the carriage and there's the loops that hang from the ceiling, it's that, but without the walls or the floor. It's just the loops hanging from the ceiling. And what happens is you stand at a platform and you see these, like the thing with the loops coming towards you, and it doesn't stop, it doesn't slow down. You just have to be ready to hook your brolly onto one of those loops, and then you've got to hold on to the body of your umbrella for dear life, and it whizzes you in this meandering path all around the city, up high, down low, and then when you get to your destination, again, it's not going to stop or slow down to let you off. You just have to jump and hope that you've timed the landing correctly. So it's not for the faint of heart, or really anyone who doesn't have really good upper body strength. Very silly, should never have been built, and that's Nevermoor in a nutshell. So we're taking the brolly rail to the Wondrous Society campus, which we call One Sock. This is the second kind of important concept that we're introduced to here, which is one sock weather. So within this large kind of 100-acre campus in the middle of the old central part of Nevermoor, there is this thing called one sock weather, which is that whatever the weather's doing outside the grounds of One Sock, whether it is cold or it's a sunny day or it's lovely spring day, it's whatever that is, but just more. So on this particular day, it's a beautiful spring day, and outside it's glorious, and then inside it's just, there are flowers and it smells beautiful and it's just spring completely hyped up. And the same, we find that later on when it's really cold outside, it's just miserable inside One Sock. So it can just go either way. But the one thing that remains untouched by the One Sock weather phenomenon is the fire blossom trees. So as we enter the gates of One Sock, we see a long driveway leading up to Proudfoot House, which is this beautiful red brick building covered in ivy. And that's kind of the main building on the One Sock campus. But it's lined with these dead black trees with these spindly branches that kind of look like spiders against the sky. And Jupiter says, "Oh no, they're not touched by the climate bubble that it lives in. They're not blossoming. They don't count because they've been extinct. They've been dead for over 100 years, and the gardeners are a bit touchy about them because they're impossible to get rid of." So we go up to Proudfoot House. We're not allowed inside Proudfoot House because all of these hundreds of kids who have come for the Wondrous Welcome garden party aren't yet members, and you're not allowed inside Proudfoot House unless you are a member or by very special invitation. So we're at the back in the garden, beautiful manicured garden, and we see lots of different candidates. There are a couple whose knacks are quite visible. For example, there's a dog-faced boy, and there's a girl who has very, 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 very long hair that she pulls along behind her in a wagon. And Jupiter makes the comment that he doesn't think it's the year for what he calls interesting physical features because no one has quite gotten over the girl with sledgehammer hands that graduated a few years back, because there was like a massive repair bill after she graduated. We meet next Baz Charlton. Boo. Baz Charlton is what Jupiter calls a spaghetti patron, which essentially means that he scoops up a bunch of kids every year and tries to get them, puts them forward as candidates for the Wondrous Society, which Jupiter compares to throwing strands of spaghetti against the wall and hoping that some of them stick. And the one candidate that Baz says is his kind of star this year is a girl called Noelle Devereaux, who is a singer. She has, according to Baz Charlton, the voice of an angel. And Morrigan looks over and sees this girl who looks confident and very well dressed, and she's got glossy chestnut curls and apparently the voice of an angel. And of course, Morrigan can't help feeling a little intimidated, which isn't helped by the fact that Baz is rude. He's so rude. He's talking to Jupiter and he's blatantly saying these awful things about Morrigan, saying, I will read you what he says. But this one, North, continued Mr. Charlton, waving a hand at Morrigan. I don't understand. What's the appeal? I mean, those eyes, North, those awful black eyes. The elders don't tend to go for the mean-looking ones. This one would kill you as soon as... He was cut off by a sharp look from Jupiter, his mouth left hanging open. Consider your next words carefully, Mr. Charlton, Jupiter said in the low, cold voice that Morrigan had heard from him only once before, on Eventide at Crow Manor. She shivered. And so up until this point, Jupiter has been polite-ish. He's had this thin veneer of politeness about Baz, but as soon as Baz makes this cutting personal remark about Morrigan, we see Jupiter kind of step up and do his thing, and it's quite impressive, and Baz Charlton backs down immediately. We also meet someone that we're actually going to like, which is who is Nan Dawson, who mentions that her candidate, Hawthorne Swift, is around somewhere. Nan Dawson is a 5-time dragon riding champion of the Free State, and she has a prosthetic leg. She has quite a magical kind of prosthetic leg that we can see sort of move and do its own thing, and it's because she had her leg bitten off by a nasty dragon during a competition. And her candidate, Hawthorne, is also a dragon rider. But Nan mentions that it's not actually his greatest skill. His greatest skill is troublemaking. But she's clearly very, very proud of Hawthorne. So we hear from the elders. So this is also the first time that we meet. We're meeting so many people in this chapter, so many important folks. We meet the High Council of Elders, who are made up of Elder Gregory Quinn, Elder Helix Wong, and Elder Alioth Saga, who Morrigan notes is a talking bull. More on that later down the track. And Elder Quinn gives this very interesting, inspiring speech that also imparts some important information. She says, joining the Wondrous Society is a privilege granted to the few and the special. Among our members are many of the Free State's supreme thinkers, leaders, performers, explorers, inventors, scientists, sorcerers, artists, and athletes. We are the special ones. We are the great ones. And there are times when some of us are called upon to do great things, to protect these 7 pockets against those who would do us harm. The 7 pockets refers to the 7 pockets of the Free State. Against those who would seek to take away our freedom and our lives. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A boy standing nearby whispered, the Wondersmith. And the handful of children who were close enough to hear him all looked stricken. The Wondersmith again, thought Morrigan. Whoever or whatever he was, it seemed the spectre of the Wondersmith loomed so large over Nevermoor that he needn't even be mentioned by name to strike fear in people's hearts. Perhaps it was because she was a Free State outsider, but Morrigan couldn't help thinking it was a bit silly, given that Jupiter had said that he hadn't been seen for over 100 years. So we hear about a little more about the Wondersmith. Elder Quinn also talks about how the benefits of, there may be some hard work involved and we may be called upon to do important things, but the benefits of being in the Wondrous Society outweigh the burdens. So the other key thing that Elder Quinn mentions in her speech, which is, again, brand new information to Morrigan. Are we starting to see a theme? Brand new information to Morrigan is that out of all these hundreds of children who have shown up to be candidates for the Wondrous Society, only 9 are going to be granted entry. And this kind of disturbs her, and she looks around, and it doesn't seem to be news to anyone but her. Jupiter's entirely unbothered by this. At the end of Elder Quinn's speech, Jupiter says, Mog, I'm going to go chat with some old friends. You go and make some new friends. Of course, Morrigan doesn't know how to make new friends because she's never made a new friend. But she thinks, in the spirit of stepping boldly, she's just going to go up and approach someone. Unfortunately, the group that she approaches includes Noelle Devereaux, who we saw earlier. Now, it turns out Noelle Devereaux may have the voice of an angel, but she has the personality of a nasty little rat bully because she is bullying another girl, who we will also come to know later on, spoiler, called Anar Carlo. Morrigan is not the kind of kid who can just stand by and watch someone be bullied, and so she steps in. She sticks up for Anar. And unfortunately, what usually you may find if you have ever stood up for someone in front of a bully, what usually happens is that the bully then tries to turn it on you, which is exactly what happens to Morrigan. And Noelle turns around and she says, my patron said that your patron smuggled you in illegally from the Wintersea Republic into the Free State. Did you know that you could go to jail for that? And Morrigan thinks, am I here illegally? I guess what happened at border control was a bit weird. But she just says, you don't know what you're talking about, Noelle, and my patron says that your patron is an odious man. Noelle is, surrounded by her little cronies, and one of her friends in particular just can't stop laughing, and she's just giggling in the background while Noelle is doing her bullying thing. And in the midst of this, it says here, Morrigan was beginning to miss the old days in Jackalfax when everybody had been terrified by her mere presence. She thought of Jupiter and drew back her shoulders, saying in a voice as low and cold as she could muster, "Consider your next words carefully." Bless her. Unfortunately, it just doesn't have the same effect as when Jupiter did it because Noelle and everyone just laugh at her. So what happens next, though, is that suddenly Noelle, in mid-bullying mode, out of the sky, a green jelly sculpture falls on her head and just covers her in this oozing green jelly. And she runs off and she's crying out for her patron. And the jelly was dropped by a boy. I'm going to read you... Okay, I'm going to read you our little intro to this boy, and then before I do, I want to tell you, this jumper that I'm wearing, you have no reason to believe this, but this was a total accident that I am wearing this today. I totally forgot that I had highlighted this passage. I've forgotten this passage even existed, but I had highlighted this to read. The boy landed with a thud next to Morrigan. He flicked his head back, pushing a mop of thick brown curls out of his eyes, and adjusted his oversized jumper. A huge blue knitted thing with a glittery cat picture on the front. I promise you, this was not planned. I just happened to buy this in Harajuku a couple of weeks ago, and I was like, oh, that's blue. I want to wear blue for my Nevermoor Readalong videos. And I just did not even think of this passage. So I just happen to describe a lot of silly clothes in these books, and they're usually the kind of thing that I would wear. The cat had a pink ribbon sewn onto its head and a jingling silver bell attached to the collar. Morrigan wondered what in the world had possessed him to wear it. It's probably what a lot of people think when they see my wardrobe. I liked that thing you did too. Consider your next words carefully and all that, he said, mimicking her low, angry voice. But I reckon the only language some people understand is the language of the surprise jelly attack. She didn't know how to respond to this unusual advice. The boy nodded sagely, and they stood in silence for a few moments. Morrigan couldn't stop staring at his jumper. Do you like it? He said, looking down at his chest. My mum bet me I wouldn't wear it today. She bought it from a catalogue. She gets loads of them for me. It's called the Ugly Jumper Company. She's pretty funny. What do you get? For what? For winning the bet. I get to wear the jumper. He frowned, looking genuinely confused for a moment until his face lit up with some new idea. Hey, could you help me with something? So what he is recruiting Morrigan to do unbeknownst to her, is help him with a prank. So he knows that there is a barrel of toads somewhere in the grounds because he overheard someone telling his patron that they've been having a toad problem in the garden recently. And in true Hawthorne Swift fashion, what we will come to know as Hawthorne Swift fashion, he just thinks cannot waste a perfectly good barrel of toads, and he gets Morrigan to help him drag it into the party and up onto the balcony, and he tips it over and he pours out a waterfall of toads into the middle of this garden party. And that is our introduction to Hawthorne Swift, and that is how Morrigan and Hawthorne become friends. This is like Morrigan's first proper friendship. Is her best friend. That's not a spoiler. You've read the chapters. You know that this guy's about to become her best friend in the simplest way, in the way that when you look back at your childhood and you think of how did we make friends on the playground, we more or less went, do you want to be friends? Do you want to be friends? Yeah, okay, let's be friends. And Hawthorne is such a positive, innocent, happy-go-lucky soul that I think he sees this girl who is standing up for Anna, and he thinks, yeah, she seems all right. She'll probably help me pour a bunch of toads into a party. And of course, that's exactly what they do. It's the end of the party. Morrigan and Jupiter leave in a carriage, and Jupiter says, "You made a friend." "I think so." "Anything else of interest?" Morrigan thought for a moment. "I think I made an enemy too." "I didn't make my first proper enemy until I was 12. He sounded impressed. And in this conversation, she asks him, "Am I here illegally?" And he basically says, yeah, a bit. Sorry about that." And Morrigan tries to get some assurance from him that if she doesn't get into the Wondrous Society, that she might be able to stay anyway. Maybe he could give her a job in the Hotel Deucalion. And typical Jupiter is sort of evasive but reassuring, and he thinks that that's enough. He thinks that he can just say, "Hey, we'll blow up that bridge when we come to it. Don't you worry, we'll sort it out." And that will somehow magically mean that Morrigan doesn't, stress about it. And he's very wrong. Chapter 10, Illegal. Morrigan is settling in to life in the Hotel Deucalion, and as Jupiter promised, her boring bedroom is getting to know her, and it is changing day by day. And every day she wakes up to new, beautiful, interesting things that she loves instantly and that make it feel like her own bedroom. There's a leather armchair in the shape of an octopus, and window boxes with beautiful flowers, and a skeleton hat stand with a fedora, and all sorts of things that she just instantly adores. And for the first time ever, Morrigan Crow felt that she was in exactly the right place. Now, this is undermined somewhat when midway through spring, the Hotel Deucalion receives an unannounced visitor in the shape of Inspector Harold Flintlock from the Nevermoor City Police Force. Or the stink, as Jupiter calls them, as people call them. That's the slang term in Nevermoor. Just like in Britain, I don't know if it's London specific or if it's all of Britain, but the slang for the police is the filth. In Nevermoor, they call the stink. It's my little hat tip to London life. Inspector Flintlock is here because he has heard a rumour or he's received an anonymous tip-off that Jupiter is harbouring or has illegally smuggled someone in from the Wintersea Republic into Nevermoor. And he says, that's big trouble. And Jupiter says, yeah, well, it would be if it was true. And he denies it. And he kind of, he's jokey and he's running rings around this Inspector Flintlock until it kind of turns serious and culminates in this exchange, this rather tense exchange. Inspector Flintlock slapped his notebook in the palm of his hand. "Now listen here, North. The Free State has strict border laws, and if you're harbouring an illegal refugee, you're breaking about 28 of them. You're in a lot of trouble here, Sonny. Illegals are a plague, and it's my solemn duty to guard the borders of Nevermoor and protect its true citizens from Republic scum trying to weasel their way into the Free State." Jupiter turned serious. "A noble and valiant cause, I'm sure," he said quietly, "protecting the Free State from those most in need of its help." Now, a few of the staff hear this commotion and they amble into the lobby, drawn by the raised voices. "Everything all right here, Captain North?" asked Hedgery, leaving the concierge desk to stand beside them with Martha. "What a terrible ruckus," said Dame Chanda. She put her arm around Morrigan and glared at Flintlock. "Did somebody call for security?" Fenestra said from the staircase, where she sat casually cleaning her enormous claws as if preparing for a meal. "Shall I bite his kneecaps, Jove?" asked Frank the vampire dwarf, sticking his head through Jupiter's legs. So everyone kind of rallies to support and protect Morrigan. So he's demanding Morrigan's papers that will prove that she's here legally. And Jupiter says, actually, you need to brush up on your Wondrous Society law because you have no right to demand the papers of a member of the Wondrous Society. Like, we deal with our own lawbreakers. And Flintlock says, but she's not a member of the Wondrous Society. She's only a candidate for membership to the Wondrous Society. You need to brush up on your One Law Handbook, Flinty. Article 97, Clause F. A child who is participating in the entrance trials for the Wondrous Society shall, for all legal purposes, be considered a member of the Wondrous Society for the duration of said trials or until she is removed from the trial process. All legal purposes. That means she's already ours. A feeling of righteous relief coursed through Morrigan. Already ours. However, Flintlock leaves with a warning. He says, for now, she's yours for now, North, but as soon as she fails the trials, I'll be wanting to see those papers of hers. He stroked his mustache and straightened his mud-brown uniform, looking down at Morrigan as if she was something disgusting on the bottom of his shoe. She'll be back to her filthy republic before you can say, please, Inspector, have pity, and you, my friend, will be in so much trouble that even your precious society won't be able to help you. I have said before that I think Inspector Flintlock, of all of the villains and antagonists in this series, and there are quite a few, I find him the least redeemable. And I stand by that on reread. And that's just based on everything he says and does on the page. And that's that on that. And after the inspector leaves, Morrigan says to Jupiter, what happens if I have to leave Nevermoor? He says, don't be silly, Mog. That's never going to happen. But that night she has a nightmare, that it is the show trial, and she opens her mouth to sing and nothing comes out, and then she gets dragged away by the police and given to the hunt of smoke and shadow. So there is still this spectre hanging over Morrigan, that if she does not make it through the Wondrous Society trials, that she might have to go back to the Wintersea Republic and face the hunt of smoke and shadow and confront her certain death. Yeah. Ba-bow. Chapter 11, the book trial. So we open back at the Hotel Deucalion. Hawthorne has come to visit. He and Morrigan are supposed to be studying for their upcoming book trial, which is the first of the 4 trials. But they're not really studying. They're mostly just mucking around and visiting all of the cool rooms in the Hotel Deucalion. And Hawthorne is suitably impressed. He loves this place. He asks her, when they do finally get down to the studying part, he asks her what her knack is. And of course, we know Morrigan doesn't know what her knack is. And she says, I don't know. Hawthorne is unfazed by this. And he says, oh yeah, that's fine. Like, a lot of people keep it a secret. It gives people an edge at the show trial if you keep it a secret. And Morrigan's kind of horrified that he thinks that she's trying to keep this from him. And she's like, no, I don't have one. And Hawthorne's reaction is just like, okay, should we go back to studying? Because Hawthorne is Hawthorne. He doesn't care. Jupiter had mentioned to her at the Wondrous Welcome that the kids who are trying out for the society tend to try to forge valuable alliances and valuable friendships amongst themselves based on who they think will kind of get into the society, hopefully with them. And Morrigan's first thought is, well, there goes this friendship because I'm quite obviously not a valuable alliance. But Hawthorne just doesn't care. He's an unbothered king. And I really like that about him. He's not in it for a valuable alliance. He is just very pure, and he's decided that this gal is his buddy, and the end. Cut to the book trial. Sometime later, Morrigan arrives at Proudfoot House for the book trial. Jupiter is trying to be reassuring. He is giving her advice and hyping her up. And the 2 pieces of advice that he gives her is, 1, be honest. Or he says, answer the questions honestly. And she thinks he's mistaken. And she's like, you mean correctly? Because she thought this was like an exam, a test. And the other thing he says is, don't be afraid to make them wait. There are 2 parts of the test. There is the written exam and there is the oral exam. Morrigan goes in to do the written exam and she has this little booklet and it's blank. And then the time starts and everyone around her is opening the booklet and they seem to know what they're doing. She looks down and this book has started asking impertinent questions. She gets 3 questions that she has to answer. Well, first of all, it says, you're not from here. Why do you even want to join the Wondrous Society? And she starts giving answers like, I want to be an important and useful person in the realm. And the book's like, ba-bow, it starts to burn itself. And she looks around and she sees that this is happening to other kids as well, that their booklets are starting to burn up. And one of them just, it completely goes up in smoke, and then that child gets escorted from the hall. And she's like, oh no, I have to not let my booklet burn up. And so as she's trying to frantically come up with the right answer, and she's not really being honest, she's just telling the book what she thinks it is the right answer, what she thinks it wants to hear. And so this is kind of a test of Morrigan. She has to figure out, it's not just her being honest with the book, it's her figuring out how to be honest with herself and how to dig deep and to really think about, like, what is the answer to this? Why do I want to be part of the Wondrous Society? And after a little trial and error, she comes on the answer, which is, I want brothers and sisters. I want a family who will be loyal to me, stand by me forever. And that's the right answer. And then the second question that the book asks her is, what is your biggest fear? Morrigan didn't even have to think about that one. Total no-brainer. That dolphins will learn to walk on land and shoot acid out of their blowholes. That is scary. And if you don't agree, you're not picturing it correctly. Dolphins, listen, I love dolphins. This is not a space for dolphin slander. I will say that straight up. But dolphins are very, very intelligent. And listen, they have a reputation for being a little vicious. And I'm just saying, I love dolphins, but if they did learn to walk on land, I feel like it would be a matter of time before they learned how to shoot acid out of their blowholes. And if that happened, they can have the land. I will go into the sea. You won't see or hear from me ever again. Anyway, we can't talk about dolphins all day. I don't have time. This is how my last video ended up being 2 videos. She drills down and realizes that her fear is being forgotten. The book unburns a little bit when she writes that. Go on, it said. She writes that nobody will remember me, that my family won't remember me because, Morrigan paused, her pencil hovering above the smoky page, because they'd rather forget that I ever existed. And the book accepts that answer because that, it turns out, is the truth. And then her final question, how will you ensure that people remember you? She writes, I don't know. And then she thinks about it and she adds the word yet. And she passes the test. The second component of the book trial is the oral exam. Morrigan has to stand in front of the 3 elders and answer their questions. Now, this is really different. This is not a test of honesty. Morrigan really isn't sure what this is a test of. While she's waiting to go into her oral exam, first of all, she sees her group that she's waiting with includes a boy hugging his knees to his chest and rocking back and forth. And that turns out to be Francis Fitzwilliam. Remember that name for later on. And there's also 2 twins who are very energetic and they're quizzing each other. They're giving each other like a little pop quiz and then they're obnoxiously yelling out the answers. And the other person in her group is the girl that she recognizes from the Wondrous Welcome. It's Noelle Devereux's friend who is giggling at her antics, at her bullying. As Morrigan's going into the hall to see the elders, she hears the girl, Noelle Devereux's friend, say to the obnoxious pop quiz twins, "You're going to fail," she was saying to them in her husky voice. "You're completely unprepared. You're not going to remember a single thing. You'll never get into the society. You might as well go home now." So Morrigan goes in and she gets her questions from the elders. The first one is, who is the leader of the Free State? Morrigan has studied things about the Free State, and so she knows who the leader of the Free State is. She says Prime Minister Gideon Steed. To her shock, the answer from the elders is incorrect. The leaders of the Free State are innovation, industry, and thirst for knowledge. Immediately, Morrigan realizes that she was not anticipating whatever this test is that they're giving her. The next question, who is Gideon Steed? Morrigan faltered. He's the Prime Minister, isn't he? Incorrect, boomed Elder Saga. Prime Minister Gideon Steed is a democratically elected steward of the Free State, a sentry who has been appointed by the people to protect the values, standards, and liberties that we hold dear. But he is the Prime Minister, Morrigan insisted. This wasn't fair. She'd answered the question correctly. You just said so yourself. The elders ignored her protest. So the first test was about, can you dig deep? Can you be honest with yourself and with us by extension? And also, I was going to say something that would be quite a big spoiler, but I will just say the questions that they asked in the written exam, just think about the information that she gave them and how that might be useful to a powerful organization like the Wondrous Society. And that's all I'm going to say because I don't want to ruin anything else. So this oral exam, what are they testing for? They seem to be testing her ability to come up with nonsense on the fly and to use weasel words and to twist truth and twist facts to conveniently present certain information in certain ways, which I find quite sinister. It's presented as just a silly, nonsensical task. But for me, I think if you look deeper into what these adults are asking from this child, I find that quite sinister, and it is deliberately sinister. And that's all I'll say about that. Anyway, she passes the test. Jupiter is thrilled. They leave the grounds, they leave One Sock, and on their way out, she touches one of the branches of the dead fire blossom trees that are lining the driveway up to Proudfoot House, and it kind of burns her. And she says to Jupiter, "That tree just burned me." He stared at her a moment and then chuckled. "Very funny, Mog. I told you, fire blossoms are extinct." Hello. There's been a passage of time. Two things happen. One, I went to get a coffee, came back, we've lost our natural light. So instead of getting nice sunshine through the window, we're getting a nice little view of Osaka at night behind me instead. And the second thing that happened was that I realized I've been sitting on the floor all day. I can't do that, guys. I'm too old. I'm going to be 40 next month. I can't sit on the floor all day. It was so comfortable. So here we are. We're over here. I'm at a desk. This is a much better situation for me. So we're up to chapter 12, Shadows. Her first trial is over. Her next trial is not coming for months, so Morrigan has the summer stretching ahead of her, and she's really enjoying it. She's enjoying getting to know all the people at the Deucalion, and she's having a lovely, lovely time. The only thing that's a bit of a disappointment is that Jupiter keeps disappearing. He's, as we've already discussed, he's very in demand. He's a popular guy. He's a useful guy. And so he keeps getting called away by the League of Explorers and the Nevermoor Transport Authority and all sorts of people to do all sorts of things. And so he keeps promising that he's going to take her to the Nevermoor Bazaar, which is a big market festival that runs all summer long every weekend. It's a nighttime market as well. And he keeps promising he's going to take her, and then things just keep coming up that are more important. And on this latest occasion, once again, the Nevermoor Transport Authority has been in touch and really desperately needs his help. Again, says Morrigan, the NTA had been sending messengers to fetch Jupiter from the Deucalion all summer long. They usually only needed his help with echoes on the Gossamer line, whatever that meant. But 3 weeks ago, there'd been another derailment, and this time 2 people had been killed. It was front page news for a week, and the Deucalion had gone wild with rumours about who was responsible and what it might mean. Some of the staff got into such a state of panic that Jupiter had to ban anyone from uttering the word Wondersmith. So, he can't take her to the Nevermoor Bazaar, but he does promise that next week he will take her and Hawthorne and Jack, his nephew, who is going to be home from boarding school, and they will all go to the bazaar together. Now, the next day, Morrigan comes down to breakfast, as usual, in the staff dining room, and there is a boy at her table, in her chair, eating her toast. And she's so confused by this, and she says, "Are you lost?" But it turns out he's not lost. This is Jack. And Jack says, your chair, excuse me, I've been here for 5 years, and this is where I eat breakfast every day. And so it's not a great first meeting for Jack and Morrigan. Things get a little cold and a little snarky between them. They both annoy each other. And Morrigan makes a mental note to wake up earlier the next day so that she can get there before Jack does. That night, Hawthorne comes over and they're having a sleepover, and they decide to explore the hotel and look for rooms that they can get into. Some are locked, and the rule for Morrigan is that if a room is locked and she doesn't have a key, then she's not allowed in. And Hawthorne says, "Does that mean that you're allowed into any unlocked room?" And so, of course, they have to go exploring and looking for unlocked rooms. They don't find many that they haven't already seen, because they've already done quite a lot of exploring at the hotel. But Morrigan realizes that she has a key. So they see this locked door, and the door handle is really familiar. It's made of silver filigree. It reminds her of something. Her umbrella. And she runs to get her umbrella, and it turns out that the little opal bird on the tip is a key for this room. A nice little Easter egg surprise that Jupiter has left for her to discover. Now, in this room, it's completely empty. Large, dark room. It is lit by one lantern, a candle, glowing in the middle of the room. And they walk in, and their shadows become monstrous against the wall, and they start to make shadow puppets. Hawthorne pretends to be a zombie, and then the zombie gets big and scary and ridiculous. And if they make a kitten, it turns into a roaring lion, and if they make a fish, it becomes a shark that wants to eat them. So these shadows kind of take on a life of their own, and they become a much bigger, more ferocious, scarier version of whatever they were originally. And Morrigan tells this story, and it's about a little boy going through the woods, and there's a wolf that howls in the distance, and then her story starts to take on a life of its own, and there are shadow wolves, and then there are hunters on horseback with rifles, and it's terrifying because she didn't mean to tell any of that story, and it's clearly reminding her of the hunter smoke and shadow, which terrified her. But one of the wolves escapes from the Hall of Shadows, and Morrigan rushes out of the room. And this is an important point for Morrigan and Hawthorne, because Hawthorne has no idea why this would be so terrifying to Morrigan. But this is the point where she just confesses everything. She just explains everything to her friend about being born in Jackalfax and being smuggled in to the Free State and chased out of the Wintersea Republic by the Hunter Smoke and Shadow. And she says everything about the fact that if she doesn't get into the society, then she won't be able to stay in Nevermoor and blah, blah, blah. And once she has confessed this entire story to Hawthorne, he simply looks at her and says, "No offense, but that story is way better than the one that you made up." Once again, Hawthorne is just unflappable. She says to him, "Hawthorne, you've got to keep it a secret." She doesn't want anyone to know that this is the origin. She's already been told that she's got to keep this under wraps. And Hawthorne holds out a little finger and he says, "Morrigan Crow, I pinky promise to keep your secret and not tell another soul." Morrigan's like, "You pinky what?" "Pinky promise." He pushed his little finger closer to her face. "I've never broken a pinky promise in my life. Never." So when I was in high school, my best friend Dean used to say this all the time. This was his thing, is if he was promising something or if he was swearing he was telling the truth about something, he would say, "I pinky promise." And Jessica, I've never broken a pinky promise in my entire life. It was practically his catchphrase, and so I borrowed it for Hawthorne to say. So, turns out they've left this creepy room accidentally open while they're having this conversation, and one of the shadow wolves has escaped out of the room, and now it's roaming in the hotel, and they don't know where it is. So, Morrigan and Hawthorne go looking for this shadow wolf, and Jack overhears them, and he is furious. And he says, "Why have you let a shadow out of the Hall of Shadows? Jupiter's going to be furious. You've got to find it." And he gives them each a torch, and he says, "You've got to split up and don't stop looking until you find it. And when you find it, shine your light on it on the brightest setting until it disappears." And so they split up, and Morrigan is looking in the north wing, and it's all very dark and scary. And she thinks that she hears it. She hears some humming from another room, and she goes and has a look. Who is it but our friend Mr. Jones, who is there on business? He says, "Yeah, I sometimes come into Nevermoor on business, and I like to visit friends, and what the Wintersea party doesn't know won't hurt them." And he asks about what she's doing, what she's looking for, and she tells him there's a shadow that's gone missing. She tells him about the Hall of Shadows, and she says, we've got to look for this shadow and shine a light on it so that it goes away. Mr. Jones didn't laugh at her or call her a liar or even express the smallest amount of surprise. "You created this shadow on your own?" "Sort of, and it sort of created itself." He looked oddly impressed by that. It's a scary shadow, you said." "They're all scary. Even if you make a nice one like a kitten, it'll turn into a man-eating tiger or something. It's like they're trying to be scary." "That makes sense." Morrigan was surprised. "Does it?" "Shadows are shadows, Miss Crow." His eyes reflected the moonlight. "They want to be dark." And the important bit of information that Mr. Jones gives her is that actually he suspects that her friend was having some fun at her expense. He was playing a trick on her, because he says anything made inside the Hall of Shadows is nothing but an illusion, just a bit of theatre. It can't harm anyone. And Morrigan's furious. She says, "I'm going to kill Jack." And Mr. Jones chuckles and he says, "Pity you can't send a real wolf to teach him a lesson." And as he leaves, he says, "Remember, my employer's offer is always open." He was well and truly gone by the time Morrigan realised she'd never told him the shadow was a wolf. Dun dun dun! So Morrigan returns to the lobby to find Jack, because she's very mad at him and the trick that he has played. But when he sees her coming, he says, "Why are you coming out of the south wing? You were supposed to be looking in the north wing." She's like, "Who cares about the south wing? You played a trick on me." And Jack is focused on the fact that she's just come from the south wing. And he says, "Can you not see that sign? Can't you read? It says south wing, closed for renovations, dangerous, don't enter." Morgan's like, "I don't care. I don't care about the south wing. You played a trick on me. You're horrible." Jack didn't look remotely guilty. "It's not my fault you're gullible. Try having a brain next time." And they have this little argument. Morrigan accuses him of being jealous because he says, "I can't believe my uncle thinks you belong in the Wondrous Society when you can't even read a sign. Are you jealous? Is that it?" Morrigan threw the torch down beside him. "Jealous he chose me as his candidate and not you." Jack's eyes narrowed. What, did you... Jealous of you? Why would I be jealous of you? You don't even have a knack. You said so yourself outside the hall of... Morrigan gasped. You were spying on us. So he's just kind of torturing them for fun. Hawthorne returns. Morrigan and Jack have well and truly fallen out by this point, and they're basically enemies. End of chapter.